Hello, everyone. We are going to be talking about mitochondrial dysfunction. And we have Dr. Bryan Rade, who's a naturopathic doctor and who's going to help us understand what exactly is this. So, welcome, Dr. Bryan.
Thank you.
All right. So, let's just talk about what exactly is mitochondrial dysfunction and what are the causes of that.
Sure. So to start, the mitochondria are these little units that are in our cells. Every single cell in the body has mitochondria, except for one cell type, which are our red blood cells. So they're the only type of cell in the whole body without mitochondria. And every cell has thousands or sometimes millions of mitochondria per cell. So to give kind of a rough visual depiction of that, if you pictured you had a watermelon and the watermelon is a cell and it was just full of little black seeds, the little black seeds would be like the mitochondria inside of our cell. So with mitochondria, their main job is to make energy for our cells. That is the main thing that they do. They do have some other functions as well, but just to keep it a little bit simple, they mostly just make energy for our cells. And so if there's mitochondrial dysfunction, then that's where one or more parts of the mitochondria are not working properly, and that interferes with cellular energy production. And that's a really big deal because, as I said a minute ago, every single cell in the body has mitochondria. Every single cell in the body needs energy to function. And so if there's mitochondrial dysfunction, mitochondria aren't working properly, then literally any cell type in the body, except for red blood cells, can potentially have a problem. And so it's really, in my humble opinion, it's arguably the most important topic in medicine because mitochondria are involved potentially in every single disease process out there, unless it's related directly to red blood cells. In terms of what can cause mitochondrial dysfunction, essentially anything that interferes with the normal physiological flow of what's supposed to happen in the mitochondria. And we can get into what that involves in a little more detail, but some of the heavy hitters, if you will, that interfere with mitochondrial function would be if people, for one reason or another, don't have enough of all of the various materials that are required in order to in order for the mitochondria to work. The mitochondria require any different ingredient, dozens of different vitamin and mineral and amino acid and antioxidant and lipid factors to work properly. And so if they're missing one or more of those ingredients, that can cause mitochondrial dysfunction. So if a person has digestive tract issues, they're not absorbing their nutrients properly, or they're eating an unhealthy diet, or at least not a varied enough diet to get all the nutrients they need, those are some reasons why someone might not have all of those required cofactors or nutrients for the mitochondria to work. And then there are a range of different external factors that can impact our mitochondrial function. So heavy metals, which pretty much everybody knows that heavy metals like lead and mercury are bad for us. Well, one of the primary reasons that they're so bad for us is because they are mitochondrial poisons. They actually our mitochondrial function in a severe way. Other chemicals like glyphosate, which is in Roundup, other pesticides and things like that, they'll interfere with mitochondrial function. Viruses like the Epstein-Barr virus and others, that can interfere with mitochondrial function. Certain bacteria like the Lyme disease causing bacteria or certain related microbes called the Lyme co-infections, that can potentially interfere with mitochondrial function. There's some limited evidence to suggest that electromagnetic radiation, EMFs, can potentially interfere with mitochondrial function. So a lot of the things that a lot of us in the integrative healthcare world talk about being, these are not good for us, when you actually trace it back to, well, why? Like, in what way does it impact our physiology? One of the big ways is that it interferes with that mitochondrial function. The cells can't make enough energy, and then the organs and glands and other systems in our body can not work as well, and we start to get sick.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a big deal, right? Like the way you explained with the watermelon analogy, I mean, that kind of explains it. So now the thing is, now there is so many other things, right? The symptoms, how do we know? I mean, how would someone know that they have mitochondrial dysfunction as opposed to like something happening in your stomach or I don't know, somewhere else? I mean, how would you know exactly that is mitochondrial dysfunction?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So the short answer is that if there's issues with a person's energy levels in some way, shape, or form, then that tells us that there's definitely something going on with mitochondria, because the mitochondria make 90% of all the energy in our bodies. About 10% is made by this other process called glycolysis, and that makes about 10% of our energy on average. But 90%, so the vast majority of energy is made by the mitochondria. So if a person says, I feel tired, then then another way of saying that is my mitochondria are not cranking out enough energy for me to feel as good as possible. So if a person feels tired, if their brain feels tired, and another term for that is brain fog. So brain fog, if you look at the physiology of that, it's just your brain is tired. That's what it is. And so your brain's not producing enough energy in order to meet its day-to-day demands. That could also manifest as memory impairment or issues with focus, or when people say, I can get through the work day, but then at the end of the day I crash, or I get through the work week and then on the weekend I have to crash and I'm just lying in bed watching Netflix all weekend. I have no affiliation with Netflix, so it could be Hulu or anybody else, but whatever you want to watch. Then that's a classic example of mitochondrial dysfunction, because the patient essentially doesn't have enough energy to meet their day-to-day demands. They kind of run on adrenaline through the day, and then they have to crash to basically kind of pay back that energy debt that they've incurred. So low energy and brain fog, which is low energy in the brain, those are two hallmark symptoms. As you touched on, gut issues could cause low energy. But again, if we sit back and say, well, why? Well, part of it might be that gut issues are going to cause inflammation. So the body's wasting energy trying to put out those inflammatory fires in the gut. And then that's part of why one might feel tired. But another reason could be that they are not absorbing all of their nutrients, and therefore they're missing some of those many nutritional cofactors that are needed for the mitochondria to work properly. So those are that's kind of the short answer in terms of symptoms. There's mitochondrial dysfunction. There are other clues as well, but I'll leave it there so as to not keep talking your ear off.
Sure. So now I understand the fatigue part and the tiredness part. So as a naturopathic doctor, would you do any test, or someone walks into your clinic and say, oh, I feel all the way tired, or would you just kind of say some kind of a test to kind of validate that this is mitochondrial dysfunction versus could be something else?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Unfortunately, there are no 100% definitive, 100% thorough tests to assess for mitochondrial dysfunction. There are several tests that are out there. There's something called the Mitoswab test. There's something called an organic acids test, which gives us some indication of mitochondrial function. There's a medical doctor in the UK named Sarah Myhill. She's written several great books about mitochondrial dysfunction. There's a lab panel, but I think you have to be in the UK to access it. So we're out of luck here in Canada, where I am. And there's a couple of other tests out there, but they only look at very specific parts of the mitochondrial function. There are literally dozens of chemical steps that are required to make energy in the mitochondria, and there is no test that looks at every single step. So when doing those tests, it can be useful, but it doesn't. Just because those tests look fine doesn't mean that the person's mitochondria are definitely functioning optimally. So we have to just kind of think to ourselves, the thing that I say to my patients all the time, and it's a little bit of a cheeky thing to say, but if you want to know if you have mitochondrial dysfunction, just ask one question. Am I tired? And if the answer is yes, you have mitochondrial dysfunction. So that's the $0 2-second test to know, do you have mitochondrial dysfunction? What we can look at, though, in terms of testing would be to say, well, what are some of the things that control mitochondrial function? Well, the adrenal glands control mitochondrial function. The thyroid gland controls mitochondrial function. Again, if a person has heavy metals, which we can test for, if they have gut issues or malabsorption issues, which we can test for, if they have elevated levels of chemicals in their body, which we can test for, we can do these tests to see, are you full of any mitochondrial poisons? Are you malabsorbing your nutrients? So we can do indirect testing to know if mitochondria might be compromised. Again, the adrenal glands, the thyroid gland, they have a huge role to play in regulating mitochondrial function. Actually, a really important topic, because your listeners might say, well, you're talking about feeling tired and how that's related to the mitochondria, but I've heard people talk about adrenal glands, and if your adrenals aren't functioning properly, I feel tired. If my thyroid gland's not functioning properly, I feel tired. Well, there's actually a big mitochondrial link there. Thyroid hormone and adrenal gland hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, they don't make energy in your body. You don't release thyroid hormone and it magically lets this energy balloon release in your body. What happens is those hormones tell your cells to tell the mitochondria to make more energy. So I kind of think about thyroid hormones and adrenal hormones as being like the managers of your body that are telling the mitochondria what to do, but the mitochondria do all the work. So it'd be like, a big office building and you're giving the CEO all the praise for like, what a good job everybody's doing, but it's really all of the worker bees that are doing all the work, and the worker bees of your body are these mitochondria.
Yeah, so these are the worker bees in the body, right? That's the, yeah. So that's really interesting. So now let's come to the protocol or the framework. Like someone comes to you and say, "Oh, I'm feeling tired all the time." What is a naturopathic protocol? Then how are you going to get these little bee, worker bees to start working again in the body and start producing the energy from a naturopathic point of view?
Yeah, that's a great question. So essentially, there's two categories of treatment approach that we have to think about. So the one category would be making sure that the mitochondria have all of those raw materials that they need to function properly. So as I mentioned earlier, there are literally dozens of different nutritional cofactors that are required for mitochondria to work properly. A great example would be B vitamins. Everybody knows that B vitamins are important for energy production. Well, the reason that they're important by and large is because they are some of the cofactors needed for your mitochondria to work. Some of the core molecules or key molecules in the energy production pathways are these things called NADH and FADH. Well, respectively, those are vitamin B3 derivatives and vitamin B2 derivative. Vitamin B5 to run other parts of the mitochondria. You need vitamin B12 and folate, which is another B vitamin, to run other parts of the mitochondria. So we need all of these various nutrients, not just B vitamins, but certain minerals and trace minerals, certain amino acids like taurine and proline and carnitine, and then other nutraceuticals, things like coenzyme Q10, to just run all the machinery, if you will, that's inside the mitochondria. And then we also need to make sure that we have good levels of antioxidants in our systems, because the mitochondria have not a cell membrane, they have a mitochondrial membrane that's just like our cell membrane. So the cell membrane, kind of this outer, covering around our cell, it protects our cells, it allows good things to come in, gets bad things out. But then inside the cell, around all the little watermelon seeds, so to speak, there's another membrane around that called the mitochondrial membrane. And if we don't have enough antioxidants, then those mitochondrial membranes get damaged and they don't work properly. And so there's this interplay of all these vitamins, minerals, amino acids, antioxidants that all go into making sure the mitochondria work properly. So what it comes down to in my practice is that I found that, and with the patients I work with, and most of the patients I work with are quite sick. They've been chronically ill for years or sometimes decades. They have lots and lots of issues going on. A lot of them have a hard time just getting out of bed to come in for an appointment. And with those patients, oftentimes we really need to support them comprehensively. We can't get away with just a B complex. We have to make sure that they're getting all of these nutrients. So there are certain companies out there that put together formulas that are sort of tailor-made for clinicians. So if we say, well, we want you to have all of the mitochondrial support nutrients, not just 2 of them or 5 of them, like I want you to have all, say, 24 of them, well, then we can actually put the patient on all of those nutrients. And the nice thing with some of these companies out there is that they're able to put that all together into one formula and make it markedly easier than taking 24 bottles of different supplements. And then it's also markedly less expensive than paying for each one individually. So one of the facets of treatment, to bring it back to your question, is giving the patient all of those nutritional cofactors that they need in order to run the mitochondria. The other category of treatment is making sure that we're addressing any or all of the relevant causes as to what might be, poisoning or interfering with the mitochondria. So looking to see if the patient comes in and says, I've been, a welder for years, or I've been a plumber, or I go to a shooting range and I shoot, lead bullets. Like, well, we're probably going to do a heavy metal test. And if there's heavy metals, we can support the mitochondria with nutrients until the cows come home. But if they're full of heavy metals, it's not going to work that well. Or we might, if they say, I have trouble losing weight, my hair is thinning, my energy levels are low, I'm cold all the time. Well, we want to look at their thyroid function. And if we see the thyroid is off kilter as well, we have to figure out why. And then also maybe work with the mitochondrial support nutrients, but we're going to need to rehabilitate that thyroid gland, because if you don't have a good manager of the office building, the worker bees are just going to run amok and they're not going to get much work done. So we need to look at those root cause factors that I touched on earlier as well.
Sure. So mitochondrial dysfunction is very common. I mean, it's really, people who are watching, if you have any questions, I see people watching. If you have any questions, you're welcome to put it in the chat window. But understand, if you're feeling tired, more than likely you have mitochondrial dysfunction. That's what, right, Dr. Bryan, you said that. So, and if we ignore it, if someone ignores this, what are the implications? If someone says, oh, I'm feeling tired, but it doesn't matter, I'm going to just keep going. What are the other kind of, diseases that could happen if someone ignores this?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So, everybody's life circumstances, genetics, etc., their lifestyle choices, they have a really big impact on whether unaddressed mitochondrial dysfunction is going to manifest as a certain disease. So, there's certainly, I've had patients where they have been tired for 30 plus years before they come to see me, and they haven't said like, oh, I was tired for 10 years and then I developed this syndrome and then I developed that one. Like some people are, they're just tired, and it doesn't develop into something more serious. But when we look at the list of all the various chronic diseases out there, whether it's heart disease, whether it's diabetes, whether it's neurological disorders like Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's disease or multiple sclerosis, even looking at the pathophysiology of cancer, there is incredibly compelling, very strong evidence that mitochondrial dysfunction is an underpinning of all of those conditions. And so I think that addressing mitochondrial dysfunction as efficiently as possible, I think, is a really good idea, because it may lay the groundwork for some of those other conditions to become manifest over the course of time.
Sure. So the essence is, if you're feeling tired, don't ignore. Don't think that you've getting old or something else is happening. There's so many different factors that one can feel tired, and that's not what we're talking about. The essence is, if you're feeling tired, do not ignore, because that could be because of mitochondrial dysfunction in your body, and don't ignore that. So anything else you like? This is a lot of information you've given, Dr. Bryan. Thank you so much. Anything else you'd like to add and tell people who might tune in later on or watching right now?
Sure. Yeah. Basically, dovetailing on what you just said, I think that addressing low energy when it's present, I think, is a really, really important thing to do, because I think a lot of us out there, I think our species is somewhat stoic, which I think is an attribute, like a virtue in many ways, but in other ways, I think it does work against us in some senses. So if a person says, well, I'm feeling tired, but I'm getting older, it's just the way that it is. I don't think that just accepting that is really the best idea in the grand scheme of things, because quite frankly, when our mitochondria are just humming along, working beautifully, then it really helps to feel better. It keeps us healthier, and it's likely going to help to prevent other health issues from manifesting as easily. I've had patients where they have, chronic muscle issues. They're like, I go to massages every week. I'm addicted to my chiropractor, my physiotherapist, etc. And they get their mitochondria working properly, and they say, my muscles are relaxing. Like, isn't that interesting? It is interesting, and it makes perfect sense, because if we're not making energy through our mitochondria as efficiently as possible, we have to fall back on other pathways. This glycolysis pathway, and if we're just relying on glycolysis, it makes lactic acid, which is that stuff that builds up in our muscles when we're exercising. And when you're exercising, you're hitting like the end of your 5-kilometer run, or you're doing the last rep of your bicep curls, and that like soreness and fatigue you feel in your muscles, that's all because of lactic acid. Some patients are walking around with higher levels of lactic acid in their tissues, and they're going to feel more aches and pains. They're going to have more inflammation, and that might lay the groundwork for arthritis. It can lay the groundwork for impaired memory function. It can lay the groundwork for blood sugar issues that could manifest as diabetes, could manifest as cardiovascular disease down the road. So looking at all of the chronic health issues that are plaguing our society, then it's something that mitochondrial dysfunction underpins all of them. So addressing that, not settling for second-rate or third-rate or fourth-rate health, I think is a really reasonable thing to consider.
Sure, absolutely. So don't ignore the symptoms. If you're feeling tired, low energy, it could be because of mitochondrial dysfunction. And if for whatever reason, if you have mitochondrial dysfunction, that could lead to some other chronic conditions, which obviously none of us want that. So that's the essence of this particular topic today, is what we wanted to bring. This is a very important topic on low energy equals mitochondrial dysfunction. Take care of that. Don't ignore it. With that, thank you so much, Dr. Bryan, for being with us. Thank you, explaining us in a very simple way what could happen if we ignore the symptoms of low energy.
Happy to do it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.